A very good morning to everyone. A very hearty welcome to this edition of the webinar series, Science Serving Society, hosted by TIGS, the Tata Institute for Genetics and Society. The topic for today's exciting webinar, as all of you know, is the next steps in tackling antimicrobial resistance. Today's webinar is being conducted to commemorate the World Antimicrobial Awareness Week, WAAW, being observed from 18th to 24th November 2020. This initiative of the World Health Organization, WHO, is of course to raise awareness about antimicrobial resistance and to encourage and invigorate best practices worldwide to arrest the development and spread of drug-resistant infections. I'm Bipin Nair, Professor of Biotechnology and Dean Faculty of Science at Amrita University and visiting professor, Tata Institute for Genetics and Society. And I have the pleasure of moderating this webinar today. So when one speaks about AMR or antimicrobial resistance, one cannot but flash back to the year 1928 when Alexander Fleming first discovered penicillin. By the time World War II ended in 1945, US companies were making about 650 billion units of penicillin a month. At the same time, Fleming predicted that use of non-lethal doses of the drug to cure infections could make bacteria resistant to penicillin. Let us fast forward to the present. The WHO has now projected that antimicrobial resistance in bacteria, viruses, and parasites is emerging as one of the greatest challenges to public health and could lead to the emergence of a post-antimicrobial era where a simple infection could be fatal. Thus, AMR, a natural consequence of excessive antimicrobial usage, coupled with sluggish development of novel drugs and poor antimicrobial stewardship, is today a global multifactorial problem with immense complexity. This phenomenon is not only intrinsically linked to human health and behavior, but also inherently connected with our entire ecosystem, including animal health, food production, agriculture, and the environment. So in keeping with this year's slogan, Antimicrobials Handle with Care, we have invited an expert panel to share their thoughts on what could be the next prudent steps in tackling AMR. The alarm bells have been sounded, a threat that could become the next pandemic if left unchecked. To give us valuable insight into this problem of AMR, I have with me three experts in the field. Dr. Balaji Veeraraghavan, Professor, the Hilda Lazarus Core Research Chair, Department of Clinical Microbiology, Christian Medical College, Vellore. Dr. Kamini Walia, Scientist F, Division of Epidemiology and Communicable Diseases, Antimicrobial Resistance, Surveillance and Research Network, Indian Council of Medical Research, New Delhi. And Dr. Taslimarif Saiyed, CEO and Director, Center for Cellular and Molecular Platforms, CCAM, Bangalore. Welcome, Dr. Balaji, Dr. Kamini, Dr. Taslim to this event. We will have short presentations, 15 minutes each from the three experts, and follow it up with a question answer session and discussion in the end. I'd just like to request all the attendees of this webinar to type in your questions in the question answer box on the screen. So if everyone is ready, let us fasten our seatbelts and take off on this interesting topic, antimicrobial resistance, AMR. I have great pleasure in welcoming Dr. Balaji Veeraraghavan, Professor, the Hilda Lazarus Core Research Chair, Department of Clinical Microbiology, Christian Medical College, Vellore. Dr. Balaji is advisor for antimicrobial resistance surveillance with WHO CRO, that is the Southeast Asia region. Professor Balaji coordinates the National External Quality Assessment Scheme, EQAS, for bacteriology for 750 microbiology laboratories across South India. He is also the editor of the Journal of Patient Safety and Infection Control. He's a member of a national level expert group to advise and assist in strengthening public health laboratories under Integrated Disease Surveillance Program, IDSP. Professor Balaji was also elected as a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, the Royal College London. So that's the perfect match for today's discussions. I'd like to now welcome Dr. Balaji Veeraraghavan to take over and present his thoughts on AMR in India, magnitude of problems, and future trends. Dr. Balaji.
Thank you, Dr. Nair, for the kind words. And for the next 15 minutes, I would like to give the facts and figures of the current antimicrobial resistance scenario in India. And I'll also be discussing what is going to be the future trend. There is an increasing what all the reasons for increasing antimicrobial resistance is what first I am going to tell you all. The first reason is rising incomes that makes more people for afford medicines and buy antibiotics. And as of now, lot of generic cheaper antibiotics are available in the market. So you no need to pay very expensive, lot of money to buy antibiotics. And third one is unregulated over-the-counter dispersion of antibiotics are available in India. Many of the countries don't allow over-the-counter purchasing of antibiotics. Unless you have the prescription, you cannot get the antibiotics. For example, the Scandinavian countries, Norway, Finland, those countries, you cannot get even a single tablet of erythromycin or ciprofloxacin. So unless a prescription valid reason is there to take an antibiotic, you will not be given antibiotics. And discriminate antibiotic use in animals are there. So especially for poultry, there are abundant use of antibiotics, which is fourfold higher than the consumption of the human in any country. And then inappropriate antibiotic use in healthcare. So wherever there is no requirement for antibiotics, they give antibiotics in case if there is an infection. That is the reason they say, especially during this pandemic, COVID-19, the misuse and overuse of antibiotics have gone up many-fold higher because they are not sure whether what it is and what kind of secondary bacterial infection is there. So this is not only during the COVID-19 pandemic situation, even otherwise, generally in all the ICUs, transplant units, wherever they come across immunosuppressed individuals, they are using more of an antibiotic because they are not sure whether secondary bacterial infection is there or not. And inadequate public health and infection control measures in place. This all contributes to the rise in the antimicrobial resistance in any country. These are all the common reasons. And I would like to revisit a little bit on theory, principles of resistance. Resistance is progressive, evolving from low levels to high levels. Abruptly, overnight, there won't be any superbug coming out. So gradually, they become resistant and then become superbugs. So it's not in a quick event, it's a gradual process. And this is the most important sentence which you should remember. Though we blame it on antibiotics, the antibiotic does not cause mutation. They select them. You need to understand this. What happens in a group of organisms, say about colony forming units where hundreds of bacteria are there. So of the hundreds of bacteria, only one or two may have a mutated ones which are resistant to antibiotic. What happens is when antibiotic is prescribed for that individual, the antibiotic knocks out the 98 of the bacteria which are susceptible. And the two resistant bacteria thereafter proliferates and that becomes florid and that becomes the infection. And that spreads to one another and that becomes new normal. So that's what you need to understand, how the contribution of antibiotic to the antimicrobial resistance. Directly, it won't cause mutation, but it selects out the mutated bacteria to proliferate and spread. And the third important thing is organisms resistant to one drug are likely to develop resistance to other drugs. Here I would like to mention the role of mobile genetic elements. There are many number of mobile genetic elements are there with the different characters. And what they do is, because in our gut flora, there are plenty, in the environmental flora, lot of bacteria are there, pathogenic and commensal bacteria. So from one bacteria to another bacteria, there is a free flow of genetic information. It happens that it carries antimicrobial resistant coding also freely with each other. So that's why organisms resistant to one drug are likely to develop resistance to other drugs. It can co-carry on the same plasmid for many class of drugs. Resistant to many class of drugs can be co-carried on the same plasmid or same mobile genetic element. And the fourth one, very important, is use of antibiotics in one person affects other. Because if you take hypertensive or diabetes, it is only for that individual it has an effect. Whereas the antibiotic, since there is a commensal flora in the gut, if the flora of the gut changes or the genetic information of the gut flora changes, when you pass on to the feces and the environment get contaminated, and from the environment household people can get in. So that's how one person problem becomes another person problem here. This is especially true for antibiotics. So with this background, I'll move on. So now there are many thousands and thousands of bacteria are there, good bacteria and bad bacteria. In the medical field, we are very much concerned about the 6 bacteria which I have line listed here. It's called, in other words, the acronym used is escape pathogens. So the acronym E stands for Escherichia coli, S stands for Staph aureus, K for Klebsiella species, A for Acinetobacter baumannii, and P for Pseudomonas, and E for Enterobacter. So these are all the common 6 organisms which causes greater morbidity and mortality. And within this 6, if you ask me to say which is the least we should be bothered about is Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and the one which is a giant killer or more and more problematic is Klebsiella, followed by Acinetobacter baumannii. So if you ask me, these 3 are the most important one. See, these 2 are the most important one, Klebsiella and Acinetobacter, and the least is Pseudomonas aeruginosa. During my lecture, I will be mentioning why among these 6, Klebsiella and Acinetobacter are the bad ones, very bad ones. The simple reason is the resistant mechanism and the resistant rates are very high with Klebsiella and Acinetobacter baumannii, whereas with E. coli and Staph aureus and Enterobacter, it's less, and you have a lot of choices to treat. The reserve antibiotics are there for these 3 drugs, but there is no antibiotics to treat multi-drug resistant or extremely drug resistant bacteria of Klebsiella and Acinetobacter. Whereas for Pseudomonas, the percentage of incidence is also low, and there are quite a few choices are left over to effectively treat Pseudomonas. So usually the workhorse antibiotic in all the hospitals are cephalosporins, 3rd generation cephalosporins. And when cephalosporins are resistant, we call it as ESBL. So the ESBL producing organisms are quite high in India. I will be telling the exact percentages in the next slide. All I would like to show here in this slide is the ESBL producers has to be treated with carbapenem. That is the last antibiotic we have. So look at the percentage of resistance for carbapenem in the Europe. Italy, it has gone up from 1.3 to 33.5, and Greece from 43% it has moved to 61.9. 3% we have moved to 40%. This is for carbapenem resistant Klebsiella. So for the remaining 60%, we don't have any known choice. So we have to try some combinations, and we have to pray that it works. Evidence-based records means the experience are very minimal, and we are not sure which individual, how they will respond. So definitely for 40% of the carbapenem resistant Klebsiella pneumonia infection in Indian people, it's only the prayer is the ultimate answer. We don't have an effective treatment. So that's why to tell you that between the gram positive or gram negative, the worst is with the high mortality and morbidity is with the gram negative. That is the escape pathogens. Among the escape pathogens, it's the Klebsiella and the Acinetobacter baumannii. So this is one important detailed slide where I have shown the cephalosporin resistant in E. coli is 70%. The molecular resistant mechanism is 10, OXA1 and CTXM 15, and carbapenem resistant is 10%, and cholesterol resistant among this 10% is 8%. So this is how it works. So for 10% of the E. coli infected to treat, and among the Klebsiella, you can see 60% cephalosporins won't work. Among this, 40% are carbapenem resistant. And even the colistin, if carbapenem is resistant, the old drug colistin we use, but the real effect of colistin, we are not very sure, but we have no other choice but we use colistin. Even colistin resistant is very high with Klebsiella pneumonia. So you can see that nearly only 40% of the Klebsiella pneumonia patient can be saved, and the remaining is very doubtful. Whereas Pseudomonas, it's 25% resistant to cephalosporin, and carbapenem also just 25%, and colistin resistant is very low, less than 5%. So any infection with Pseudomonas aeruginosa, using colistin, you can save 95% of the patient. Coming to Acinetobacter baumannii, this is the really a super AMR bug. You can see 70% ESBL resistance are there, and carbapenem resistant is also 70%. The only last hope is colistin, which is 95% susceptible. So for these two bugs, colistin comes as a savior, but comparatively the incidence of infection with these two bugs are relatively less. I can say 30-70. This two constitutes 20% and this two 80%, and E. coli tops the chart when it comes to the incidence of infection. So how do you manage carbapenem resistant? So carbapenemase types matters, and you can see that different geographical region has got different enzyme predominance, because based on the enzyme the management lies, because all the drugs won't work against different carbapenemase producers. Each carbapenemase producers has got different antidote. For KPC, there are a lot of drugs are there, so they are in a better position to save lot of lives. So the South American continent, North America, China, they have the KPC. At least there are 6 or 7 new antibiotics which are very effective. They can be taken care. The OXA48, it's quite challenging to treat, but there are 5 to 6 newer antibiotics are there. So again, all the African, European countries where it is endemic, they can be saved. Imipenem at global level, you can see only in Japan and a few European countries it has got, you can't see much of the brown except Australia, but relatively the percentage are very, very few and far. So there is no big problem with him and Vim. And look at the NDM. The Indian subcontinent is predominantly with the NDM, and to treat New Delhi metallobeta-lactamase enzyme or antimicrobial resistant, there is no antibiotic available as of now. So we are just trying with the different combination, and to great extent we are saved. Otherwise, evidence-based single antibiotic which works against the NDM is not available. And I told about the colistin. Colistin comes under the polymyxin. And this is a superb chart which I would like to show you. Here you can see that the more colistin you use, this dotted line are the colistin use. And in real time, you develop colistin resistant. You can see how the mirror image is there. The more antibiotic misuse, overuse occurs, immediately colistin resistant occurs. Now, in the previous slides, I showed you that The carbapenem resistant bugs can be cured with colistin, but misuse and the overuse of colistin, not necessary misuse or overuse, just the appropriate use of colistin also can bring colistin resistant. So that is the current picture where whatever the drug you have, it's not working well, and to overcome this resistance, you have some old drug, repurposed drug we call. Even those drugs, even for appropriate use, it shows resistant. So we are in a really bad situation. As I told you earlier, the two giant killers in across the globe is, number one is Klebsiella. You can see it is resistant to almost all the antibiotics. It works only less than 50%. Only two drugs, tigecycline and colistin, are good. This is the old data, some 7 years old data. Even this too has fallen down. Now it's all less than 40% only for Klebsiella. And even earlier in Acinetobacter, you can see less than 30%, 30 to 40% only, all are susceptible except colistin. So if you get infected, then the chances of surviving is very, very low. So what are all the newer, so the newer antibiotics which are available, few are already FDA approved. The first generation beta-lactamase inhibitor like amoxiclav, piptazole, this is the workhorse antibiotic where almost 80% of the antibiotic prescribed is piptazole. And the newer antibiotics to take care of most of the antimicrobial resistant enzymes, these are all the ones: ceftazidime avibactam, meropenem borbactam, imipenem brelibactam, and meropenem nacubactam. This is again has failed and it's moving out of the clinical trials. Whereas these three are almost, this is a FDA approved and it's in use. This too also has been FDA approved and it's marketed in US, and it may take few years to arrive to India. Unfortunately, all the three will work for KPC enzymes, which are not seen in India. So the predominantly North American continent, South American continent, China will have benefits, while Indian subcontinent will not benefit from this new three antibiotics. So virtually now we don't have known good effective antibiotic to treat the NDM enzyme or NDM coded antimicrobial resistance in India. And what is promising for Indian setting is three different antibiotic. Aztreonam avibactam, it is in the clinical phase 3 trial and it takes care of all these enzymes, but it doesn't cover Pseudomonas aeruginosa and Acinetobacter baumannii. And the most important promising is cefiderocol, which has been a Japanese drug which has been approved for urinary tract infection by FDA. This takes care of NDM, which is promising for India. This is also takes care of metallo-beta-lactamase, that is NDM. And this takes care of almost all the antimicrobial resistant bugs. But the problem is, we are expecting, the scientific community expects that misuse and overuse of cefiderocol may develop resistance very quickly. So that is the caution we have. And already they have reported certain resistant mechanisms started appearing for cefiderocol. So, but however, this is going to be the big savior for the next few years. These two, Aztreonam avibactam and cefiderocol. In long term, more effective, it's going to be cefepime zidibactam. It is a novel antibiotic developed in India, and this is, as of now, looks the answer or ideal drug available to treat all kind of resistant mechanism and all kind of XDR pathogens. Earlier, there was some doubt about carbapenem resistant Acinetobacter baumannii. Now it looks that this drug will take care of all the multi-drug resistant and extremely drug resistant organism. So in the long run, and because it's in the phase 3 trial, it may take another 3 to 4 years to available in the market for patients' use. Once this is available, this is going to be a game changer. And cefiderocol, for the immediate past, it will help. And Aztreonam, it may help 40 to 50%. But whatever said and done, these three also are not, will not stand for long against the antimicrobial resistant development. So it will be short-lived. How short-lived it will be in the hands of the prescriber, where judicious use of antibiotics is very important. They should not misuse or overuse antibiotic. So I move on to the last slide. As of now, how we are managing with a very bleak situation is, we are just escaping with the combination therapy. We don't know how it works, but it works. The reason how it works, we think, is synergy needed for cure. So we give 2 antibiotics and it improves the outcome because multi-prong attack is there. And the most important thing is, because multi-prong attack, fast and hard, it hits the bug and it kills the bug so that it doesn't spread to another person. And it also doesn't allow the bug to develop resistance. It totally kills the organism. And the last is, because now in the medical practice, the evidence-based antibiotic prescription is very, very minimal. It occurs only in the tertiary care center. Even within the tertiary care center, only 30% are evidence-based. So overall, if you look, evidence-based treatment management is only, it will be less than 5%. 95% it's guesswork. It's an empirical choice. So when you do an empirical choice to expand the spectrum of activity to get the patient recover, they use combination therapy. So that's how it's all happening now. So with that, I will end my lecture. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Balaji. It's my privilege now to welcome Dr. Kamini Walia to share her views with us. Dr. Walia is Scientist Staff at Division of Epidemiology and Communicable Diseases. She leads the Antimicrobial Resistance Surveillance and Research Network at the Indian Council of Medical Research, New Delhi. It is noteworthy that this network is recognized nationally and internationally, along with collaborative programs with NIH and CDC in the US. Dr. Walia is the recipient of ICMR's Shakuntala Meerchand Award and the Indian National Science Academy's Young Scientist Award. May I now request Dr. Kamini Walia to share her wealth of information on AMR, measures to reduce AMR in public health institutions and governments, and the global progress in that area. Dr. Walia.
Thank you so much. I will be taking you through some of the advancements that have been made globally and which are now percolating down to other countries and which will be helpful in further addressing this challenge at a policy level, as well as how those policies are translated into action. So in 2014, Jim O'Neill published a review, and this has been talked about much, where he projected that the deaths due to AMR, which as of date are something like 700,000 lives per year, could actually escalate to 10 million people per year by 2050 at a cost of around US 100 trillion to the global economy due to loss of productivity. Not much information is available on the morbidity and mortality, which is related to drug-resistant infection from the low-middle income countries, which are a high burden, which we understand from the situation on ground in our country. Now, this antimicrobial resistance has actually compromised the advances that we made in our country as well as globally in the control of infectious diseases. And as pointed out by previous two speakers, there are many factors which contribute to antimicrobial resistance, which is the limited diagnostic ability, limited ability of availability of the trained healthcare personnel, unregulated, inappropriate use of antibiotics. Not just the broad infectious diseases like HIV, TB, or malaria have been complicated by antimicrobial resistance, but even the simple procedures for which a patient would go to a hospital, like a knee replacement or a cesarean section, have been complicated by drug-resistant infections which patients acquire in the hospitals. So these drug-resistant pathogens continue to lurk as invisible threats in our hospitals, claiming invisible victims, because there is no system to record these patients or these deaths which happen due to drug-resistant pathogens. Now, Dr. Balaji has already explained what are the current AMR trends in India. So I will not really spend time on this slide, except just to make a point that, there is a very high misuse of broad spectrum antimicrobial agents in our country. And there is a very less use of narrow spectrum. As a result, this has resulted not just in more people spending more money on broad spectrum antimicrobial agents because they are expensive, but we also have limited availability of narrow spectrum agents. So even if a doctor wants to prescribe a narrow spectrum agent, it is sometimes not available because it is not being manufactured, because there are not enough margins on that particular drug. So it's a multiple issues, it's a multi-dimensional challenge. It impacts our environment, it impacts our healthcare system, the way we spend money on our treatments, and the agriculture. So everything is encompassed. It's the multidimensional problem which requires a multi-pronged addressal approach. So the AMR rates will continue to rise, which it has been projected by many in the past using different models, if we don't take any action to blunt it at this end. So various international and national efforts have been initiated, which I will be going through in my next few slides. All these actions basically gained momentum 2 decades back, that is around 2000, when WHO published its first report on global principles for containment of antimicrobial resistance, which was followed by a global strategy for containment of antimicrobial resistance. This was followed by creation of a combined group, which is between the FAO, OIE, and WHO, which will look at the non-human antimicrobial usage and also antimicrobial resistance. 2009 onwards, it gained a lot of momentum with the European Union taking the center stage. ECDC, EMA both came up with technical reports. A transatlantic task force on antimicrobial resistance, TETFAR, was established between EU, US, and Canada. This was followed by establishment of Joint Programming Initiative on AMR in 2011. In 2011, the focus also shifted to Southeast Asian region, where the health ministers of WHO CRO committed to addressing AMR through Jaipur Declaration. This was followed by a few more reports published by WHO, European Union, and the US National Strategy for Combating AMR was launched by US government in 2014. 2014, UK also established many research councils, realizing that AMR should be a cross-council initiative. UK, I would say, has been pioneer in this and has given numerous models and examples which other countries could also use in addressing AMR. 2016, there was a major event was the UN General Assembly resolution on AMR, which previously happened recently for HIV/AIDS, so that there could be more spotlight on HIV/AIDS. So UN General Assembly passed a resolution to address AMR, which was a breakthrough step in 2016. 2016, CARBEX was also, it came into being, which is now funding many AMR related innovation in developing as well as the developed countries. Then there was a declaration on AMR by ASEAN leaders. Global Antibiotic Research and Development Partnership was also established. And 2020 saw establishment of a AMR Action Fund, where more than 20 countries have got together and contributed to fund AMR related research in order to address this challenge. Now, in 2015, and OIE got together and they gave us a strategic set of priorities under which action was immediately needed so that we could address AMR in next decade or so. This included increasing awareness, strengthening surveillance, strengthening antimicrobial responsible prescribing, then strengthening the infection prevention control in human health, strengthening IPC in animals as well as inappropriate and antibiotic use in animals, limited exposure of antimicrobial resistant pathogens to the environment, and fostering R&D of new antimicrobial therapies, diagnostics, and vaccines. Various campaigns were launched with schools, in European Union as well as in WHO. 2018, WHO gave a competency framework for healthcare workers and education. Although there are indigenous and individual efforts which are going on in many countries, yet there are many challenges to achieve the awareness around antimicrobial resistance among the communities as well as among the healthcare professionals. And some of them are that there is a large workforce which needs to be trained or made aware of this problem, and we don't have tools which are appropriately designed. There aren't messages which have been tailored as per the each segment of the population. Also, we don't know how to measure the impact. Just the qualitative impact measuring, I think, has not helped. So all this needs to be worked around. And what kind of impact do we want to achieve? How soon we should be doing these interventions? What interventions could actually cause changes in the behavior which lead to inappropriate use? So there are many questions which needs to be addressed. In India, Department of Biotechnology with Welcome, they launched the Superheroes Against Superbugs program. This is basically focusing at school children and how to use different mediums like comics, short and animated film, movies to sustain a dialogue on antibiotic resistance with this group of audience. ICMR launched a general awareness campaign in collaboration with Pfizer. This came in the dailies, newspaper dailies, and also on the FM there were radio jingles. This was a 1 month long program which did manage to create some awareness around antimicrobial resistance among the communities and the general population. Then Ministry, National Council of Museum under the Ministry of Science, they launched an exhibition of superbugs, which was supported by ICMR. Then comes a very important topic of surveillance. WHO has been advocating for One Health surveillance, because without surveillance we cannot have an evidence and we cannot combat AMR, and that will be like flying blind. So many countries have established surveillance systems. There's the EARSnet, then there is a Canadian system of surveillance. Then WHO came up with the global lab antimicrobial susceptibility surveillance program, and every country is expected to contribute annual data to GLASS, which has been going very well. However, the problem of antimicrobial resistance is more in the low middle income countries, and low middle income countries have several challenges because of which it is not possible to achieve the One Health scale of surveillance, so that we also have data from animal and also environment. Right now we have data only from human. There's shortage of laboratory professionals, lack of quality assurance systems, insufficient use of digital technologies and artificial intelligence, which is now available, and how it could translate surveillance data into clinical decision-making process. Now, systems for monitoring use of antimicrobials in animals. This is somehow, I think, the weakest link. Although there are many monitoring programs which have been launched in high-income countries, for example, ECDC or CDC has launched, WHO also has a program, but there is a lack of methodologic harmonization as to how this should be calculated. This needs more standardization, and more work needs to be done on generating data on antibiotic use and resistance in agriculture in low middle income countries. In India, ICMR established AMR surveillance network in 2013, and it looks at the surveillance, it looks at improving the infection control practices in the same group of hospitals, and also improving the rationality of prescriptions and making treatment more evidence-based. So ICMR's network is essentially looking at the surveillance, infection control, and the antimicrobial stewardship. These are this is being done through 30 hospitals, and we are focusing at Enterobacteriaceae, gram-negative non-fermenters, enteric fever organisms, diarrheagenic organisms, MRSA, Enterococcus, as well as fungal pathogens. And we have tried to bring in standardize and harmonization into how the data is being collected, improve the quality of data, and we contribute data to GLASS every year. And we have also developed a data management system. The annual report for this is published every year and is available on the ICMR website. We also worked with Indian Council of Agriculture Research in an effort to create an animal-human surveillance program. We brought out standard operating procedures for veterinary sector which did not exist till last year. So ICMR's antimicrobial stewardship program is currently being run in 30 hospitals. We also, based on the data, we bring out guidelines every year. And we have trained more than 300 staff on antimicrobial stewardship through periodic training programs. Now, infection control is a very important aspect of addressing antimicrobial resistance because infection control, poor infection control practices lead to increased hospital-acquired infections, and unless we reduce the number of infections, we will not be able to reduce the antimicrobial prescriptions. So most of the time when the patient ends up in the hospital, he's being given a cover of antibiotic. That cover of antibiotic is not for the patient, it is to cover up the compromised infection control system of a hospital. This is recognized very well globally. WHO brought in guidelines in 2016, which looks at both vertical and the horizontal IPC measures. But IPC is beyond just a guideline. It needs a multi-sectoral approach. It needs training of the staff, the nurses, adequate trained human resources are needed. Even some places don't even have the adequate water and sanitation. So all this is just one part. What we are doing in hospitals is only one part of IPC that we are addressing, but IPC is beyond hospital. It is also in the community where there is no investment on water and sanitation. So all this issue of IPC has to be addressed in a totality. ICMR is working with the under global health security agenda with CDC, and we are focusing at creating a trained workforce on IPC in the hospitals where this project is functional. There are two guidelines by ICMR as well as Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, which are available, which can be accessed as a guidance document for the hospitals who are looking forward to establish such program in their hospitals. Now, two most important component of innovation is having an innovation and using it, as well as the pipeline which we should be focusing on, what new products we need, what new diagnostics we need. Now, vaccines have been around for a very long time, and there have been a lot of discussion as to how vaccines can be used to address the challenge of antimicrobial resistance. There are 4 vaccines which are currently available, which have the potential for future averting future antibiotic treatments, which is influenza, typhoid, the RSV vaccine, and the group A streptococcal vaccine. But then there has not been much data so as to convince policymakers to assign higher priority to vaccine use than what is currently being done. So this kind of data is urgently needed. Few reports have been published by Chatham House and as well as Gavi in highlighting the potential of vaccine in addressing AMR, but more work needs to be done. Now, these are different groups which were established in last few years, which are supporting early stage non-commercial innovation, and we are hopeful that a lot of innovations like Dr. Taslim's initiative, the C-Camp initiative, a lot of new innovation which will be useful for our country will come out from these initiatives. ICMR is working with GARD-P, which is a global antibiotic research and development partnership. GARD-P is focusing at developing at least 2 to 3 drug treatments in next 5 years. And since ICMR has a network of hospitals, which has the diagnostic labs, which has the clinicians, so we hope that ICMR network sites will serve as the clinical trial sites for the upcoming drugs in next few years. Now, diagnostics, I think, is the biggest missing link in this chain of antimicrobial resistance as to how it develops. And this has been recognized globally, and Europe, UK, and US did offer some prizes around development of new diagnostic. However, we haven't seen a new diagnostic desirable with a desirable target product healthcare system settings, or sometimes they are too expensive to use. So there needs to be more discussion around what should be the new target product profile for the diagnostics which are directed towards serving the needs of the population in our country, which is a low middle income country. ICMR started a task force on AMR diagnostics. We recognize this missing link, that there are many diagnostics which are being developed through BIRAC or through many such initiatives which have not made way to the healthcare system. How could ICMR help these diagnostic developers to do the relevant studies around the validation of these diagnostics, so that these diagnostics are picked up by the healthcare system within the country, and they are helpful in reducing antimicrobial prescriptions. We also understand that even the diagnostics which are currently available are not being used optimally to guide the treatment. As a result, there is a lot of empirical antimicrobial prescriptions. So with FIND, we are working on one such project which is being undertaken in 4 sites across the country. We have also recently launched an online module between ICMR and London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, which looks at the role of diagnostics in AMR response. This is an online 2-month course which can be taken up. Then the role of antimicrobial resistant pathogens in the environment. Now, although environment is important, a lot of groups within India are also working at what is the profile of antibiotic resistant bacteria and genes in the environment, and how do they impact the clinical side of AMR that we see in our hospitals. But we are still in the process of introducing the regulations, introducing the GMP framework, because introducing these interventions is very expensive. So the industry is not very keen on introducing these regulations into antibiotic manufacturing. So there needs to be more discussion, where low middle income countries are also included, as to how these should be placed, so that more and more countries are able to pick up these regulations and also implement them. In India, Food Safety and Standard Authority of India has developed tolerance limits for seafood, shrimps, and prawns. Then the Central Pollution Control Board is developing guidelines for direct discharge of antibiotic emissions by farmers. They are also developing standard for antibiotic residues in the effluents. Now, India launched the National Action Plan in 2017 with the 6 pillars, that is improving awareness and understanding, improving knowledge and evidence, improving IPC, optimizing the use of antibiotics, supporting innovation and research, and developing the leadership. Unfortunately, there have been activities which have moved, for example, DBT is supporting its initiative. The ICMR is also trying to address the problems through its own initiatives, but we don't see a national level cohesive action around AMR. And this is not just in India, this is in many countries, because the policies are there, the regulations are there, but the implementation is not there, either because of lack of resources or because of lack of guidance. I wouldn't say there is not enough political will in India to do it. Our Prime Minister has talked about antimicrobial resistance. NAP was supported by almost 13 ministries when it was developed, yet something else needs to be done so that whatever policies we have, they are implemented well. Strategic vision, participation, coordination, responsibility, accountability, sustainability, monitoring and evaluation. These are common principles which are required for any healthcare system initiative. And this is relevant to AMR national action plans as well. There are some countries who have done well, for example, UK, Netherlands, or other Nordic countries, and these countries could actually provide learning and support collective action in addressing this global health challenge. And we can learn a lot from these countries and how we should be governing the implementation of NAP so that we are able to achieve desirable results in next few years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kamini Walia, for that very informative presentation. I have the pleasure in welcoming Dr. Taslimarif Saiyed to present his views in this webinar. Dr. Taslim is CEO and Director at the Center for Cellular Molecular Platforms, CCAM. Taslim started out as a neuroscientist with a PhD from Max Planck Institute for Brain Research in Germany, followed it up with a postdoctoral stint at the University of California, San Francisco. And most importantly, with respect to this event, Dr. Taslim has been instrumental in CCAM joining CARB-X, their global accelerator network, GAN, which supports innovative research targeting AMR in India. CARB-X, as most of us know, is focused on supporting development of new antibiotics, rapid diagnostics and vaccines, as well as other life-saving products in the fight against AMR. So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Taslimarif Saiyed to share his thoughts and plans on new innovations addressing AMR issues in India and beyond. Dr. Taslim.
Thank you so much, Professor Nair. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and thanks so much, TIGS and organizers to invite to share some of the thoughts which we are attempting to build at CCAM across India. I think we clearly heard from Professor Balaji the challenges which are there in particular. And I think we also heard very clearly that this big challenge of AMR, which is in front of us, is actually a kind of a ticking bomb, which requires our immediate attention, because it would not be a particular solution like a vaccine to solve this. This would require a long and hard battle from all of us to ensure that the damage is minimal. The damage would be there, but we'll have to work hard to make sure that damage is actually minimum. I'll just go to the next slide, just to give you a sense of where we are. CCAM is a part of Bangalore Life Science Cluster, along with NCBS and INSTEM. And we are delighted to be alongside even TIGS to share this phenomenal scientific environment. And we take the spirit of science to take the idea of building deep science innovations further. And while CCAM has been attempting to foster these deep science innovations, AMR has clearly become one of the major vertical within CCAM to foster that. And what I will try to do it in next 10 to 15 minutes is to give you a very quick glimpse of those efforts, and happy to take questions and see if you want to be a part of it going further as well. But as you can clearly see, we are actually the intensity that you see on the right bottom will actually go further and further as the time goes by, and we all know the reasons for it, because the more and more the spread of the resistance occurrence and the spread of that occurrence to go different places, from hospitals to normal places and so on, is going to be there. When we talk about AMR, one thing that we do not talk about, but Professor Nair in his opening remark clearly mentioned, and I wanted to bring it, but do not want to spend too much time on it, is One Health. I think we should look at AMR as a One Health phenomena, which has human health, agricultural and animal health around us, and then environmental health, and how that intertwining aspect of those actually impacts larger human health system. And AMR is actually one of the very clear reason for it, that we should look at it in a totality. But I'll not go into that for now, because that will take some more time. But going further, India has definitely its own reasons for us to look at AMR and take it very, very seriously. And also to say that how can we minimize, and what are the ways we can minimize the damage that is being looked at. I just took a point from World Economic Forum WF article a couple of days back. If you just look at this, it says that the looming health catastrophe that could be more deadlier than COVID-19, and AMR is not mentioned, but this is exactly for that. AMR has been projected to be one of the most lethal and aspect in terms of the human survival going forward, and the numbers are absolutely alarming. I think we heard from Professor Balaji how things have actually gone, and the graph more or less represents the discovery of antibiotics. I think Professor Nair mentioned about discovery from Fleming, but I think if we talk about coming from the 1940s, you can see a phenomenal surge. And what has happened after that? That we haven't had new class of antibiotics actually being built post 1980s, where a lot of possibly of participants were born after that. But bacteria and other organisms have changed, they have evolved. And so we have new versions of bacteria, but we do not have new versions of antibiotic. More or less, leaving us unequipped to manage this. And this is what is clearly projected. Today, if we are losing 700,000 people per year based on AMR, this will actually become 10 million people per year. That actually is going to be very, very good. This is something we are going. What it represents is that right now, if in COVID, we have said that there are around possibly 200 or 1,000 people who have lost lives because of it. We are talking about 10 million, not 200,000, 10 million people per year losing their lives because of AMR. And that is something humongous. And there are more than, in addition to this, there are more implications which are around us, which we will have to see and go forward. So there's a huge challenge that we all have to work towards, and we'll have to find ways to minimize this 10 million number. The idea should be that can we bring this number down, and how much can we bring it down? So the mission should be to bring this 10 million number down, and the work should be it should be a holistic and not one oriented. While I've pointed out antibiotics as one way to look at it, we'll have to do much more 360-degree action to actually minimize that, looking at One Health as well to build it forward. We all know about it. I do not want to go by that, but this is in one way indicates the spread of AMR. How does it spread and spreads and so on? I'll not talk much about it, but it is present around us. I think for participants, just to tell you again, it is present around us. It could be as simple as an UTI, which can actually become nasty. While we talk about UTI on a daily basis, it can become nasty if you actually caught a bug which doesn't have an answer from our side. So we have to be very careful in terms of minimize the spread and go from there. At the same time, I think you have to have a strategy, and what CCAMP we have attempted to do over the last few years, we have attempted to possibly look at it from a perspective of saying that can we have innovations while there should be a strong awareness, there should be minimization, behavioral pattern change, minimum use in agriculture, minimum use on non-prescribed drugs, and so on. But I think in terms of innovations that can actually prevent this, the spread is very important. So we are looking at from a perspective of prevention of this. How do we actually prevent infections? How do we actually reduce some of the factors which are responsible for that? Early diagnosis and diagnosis for that matter. How can that be an important aspect to look at it from a perspective of what you look at it from a view of it, that early diagnostics for UTI, turnaround time, so that one can actually give much more specific antibiotics to patients and so on, and not let them wait for a few days or give a broad spectrum antibiotics per se. At the same time, in terms of new drugs, as I mentioned, there are new ways of looking at new drugs. People are talking about small molecule, people are talking about phages. So we are actually attempting to work on this at multiple levels to see if, as a whole, we can also contribute to bring this 10 million, unfortunate number that is, in front of us, to bring that down as much as possible. We have been working in AMR for a few years now, starting from, collaborating with University of Edinburgh to Erasmus MC, collaborating with nationally to build awareness, build diagnostics, build other aspects in India in terms of what we can do together. And it has this has been 4 or 5 years, and this has led to, as Professor Nair mentioned, led to CCAM join a very elite group, which is not for the stature but very important, highest scientific collaborative group, what you call it as from CARBEX, which is the world's biggest funding program supported by US government BARDA, as well as what you would call it as in terms of how one looks at it from collaborations with other groups like Wellcome Trust, Gates Foundation, and so on. As you can see in the right top, you would have the ability to possibly talk about that there are 9 groups which have been selected. 8 of them are from the North America and Western Europe, and CCAM was very happy, very delighted to be a part of this global AMR accelerator group. What it does is that it puts us in network of the best of the scientific, best of the regulatory, best of the funding groups to ensure that we bring those connections back to India and the region to ensure that the fostering AMR innovations in prevention, diagnostics, and therapeutics continue. And it has actually given its own results. Our understanding in AMR innovations have gotten better, and we have then connected them with the innovators around India. So this is something that has been very, very good outcome for us. CARBEX, as I mentioned, which is the biggest funding body for AMR in the world right now, has actually now funded 3 companies, innovative companies in Asia for now. Across Asia, there have been 3, and good thing is that all 3 of them have been actually a part of CCAM efforts. So this is Bugworks, which a lot of us would know. In last 1 year, 2 more companies have been funded. That is Module, which is for diagnostics, as well as Gangajan, which is looking at phage as an approach to go forward. So that is very good that 3 companies coming from Asia are all from our efforts, or with support from our efforts, and we would like to build it further. And when we do that we would like to build it further, we actually have then a program that we actually launched, the CCAM AMR Quest, which was ideas to actually attract more innovative concepts from ground up, let people apply for that, and then we assess so that we can pick a few which has the ability to go to the next level. And for those who were selected, then we ran a CCAM AMR accelerator program, and Dr. Walia actually has supported significantly with her time and expertise as an expert on this program, and we're very, very delighted with that, and thank you again to her. But I think this program, again, we could actually not attracted, picked a few, and then ran a couple of months long program where best of the experts from the pharmaceutical industry, from the regulatory aspects, the Dr. Kamini from ICMR, from Dr. Rubina from DCGI, CDSCO, and many other experts actually became part of this as expert and gave the inputs on how to take those novel concepts further in AMR. So we are very, very excited. We would love to continue building it. This is kind of an older slide, but still it gives a perspective that when we add, on this slide, Bugworks plus the Gangajan and so on. So this actually allows us to see that we have within AMR verticals, we have now innovations which can go forward. And, they're really, really doing good. One of the ones that is there in Koyo, which actually is now a US FDA approved product. And they are doing fantastic work in terms of what you would call it as a device, which is called WAAW, which prevents ventilator-associated pneumonia, which is one of the most lethal condition in terms of ICU patient who go on ventilator. It's more or less a secondary infection that they acquire, and this particular device prevents that more or less to very, very high percentage. And that has been one of the strengths, that this was completely at the idea level supported at CCAM, and now it's a US FDA product, and now saving lives as we speak, even in COVID times, because when COVID patients go on ventilator, the idea is to not let them acquire secondary infection, which causes pneumonia, and do that. It's a very smart device. I would not go into details of it, but phenomenal science being done by young possibly duo of one mechanical engineer and one a design engineer for NID. So it's innovations can be built as long as you identify a problem and understand it, can be built from any quarter and any sector. And this is an amazing example of when they were actually spending time in ICU to understand problems. They realized that one could prevent WAP and one could prevent the deaths based on that. That is one aspect we have. The other one is Biomonitor, which is also going towards product and fruition. It's a device which actually combines textile chemistry as well as aerodynamics to minimize the pathogen or microbial load in a surrounding, in a smaller room to a larger room. And that is amazing because if you have airborne pathogens or even non-airborne pathogens are cause of secondary infections, even like COVID-19. And if you have things in ICU where people are getting infected because of parallel beds or otherwise, you could actually have such devices do that. This device is actually now gone to the level where they are doing final stage of validation and would be putting out in ICU settings, in planes, in many other places. You can actually bring down, it's decontaminating the environment or around you, and that is it's towards a prevention of the spread, as one would call it. Another one that has been done from a young scientist who is attempting it from Vellore, and who is trying to use a novel molecule for to prevent the existing infections which are prone at UTI, and cover it and preventing the biofilm formation. A very important aspect that we all know of. Another one is Spot Sense. Again, very exciting, innovative company startup, which women founders, total age of 4 women founders less than 100. They will cross 100 together one time because as they put on the numbers on their age, but very exciting work, and their device may come up very soon. They just gave a talk at GARDP 2 days back on the device, which is they're attempting to use saliva as for the biomarker for the inflammation or the inflammation health. And this is very, very important where there are issues of sample or blood sample which is not available, like neonates or otherwise, and you could actually have done the validation, and hopefully their product will also be game changing in terms of doing early testing and multiple testing, which saliva can provide the ability to do that. So one could actually look at infections and treatments, and once you have to see how the treatment is working out, it can be a companion diagnostics device to actually ensure that your treatment is working well or inflammation markers are not going off completely. So that's a very, very good. You may not need what you would call it as blood for actually testing it as they go forward. Module, again, very exciting work that they have done. They have more or less built one device which is about to be in the going forward towards the market, but second device is coming through. First device is more or less a credit card size device where you can put the sample and understand what kind of pathogen is causing the UTI. So it's a pathogen ID, if may call it. But at the same time, they're now building a device to understand the sensitivity assay. And hopefully they are just funded by Carbex to a significant amount for a full development of that aspect. Very, very exciting work for early diagnosis so that broad spectrum antibiotics can be minimized and the early specific treatment to patients can happen. At CCAM, we are doing another AST assay, antibiotic sensitivity assay, which we are doing in a microfluidics panel using a very exciting work from an academic collaborator, where we are hoping that we can do the AST in within 4 to 6 hours. That is an attempt, but it has gone very well forward. Of course, Bugworks we mostly know about their new journey in antibiotic and their work that they have been able to build in terms of novel molecules. They are trying to put out to a clinical trial phase 1, hopefully soon enough, and that will be a great story for India to look at. I'll skip the slides, but come to summary now. Largely to say, I didn't talk about Gangajan, which are looking at novel phage-based therapy, and they are just being supported around 10 point some million as a full development for phase 1 from Carbex again. So it's very exciting that we have these innovations are being built. But just if I may, I have to summarize, I think with these examples, we understand that AMR is a big challenge, and more so in India. And there are many reasons that we all know about. But AMR would continue to be more specific for India because of there will be different dynamics, and we'll have to understand those dynamics and build innovations which are indigenous and specific in nature. So I think I'm very happy that I could share those details with you, and I hope that we all can be a part of this to bring this, I think, a challenging number down from 10 million to less than a million or even less than that, but that can all happen together. So again, thank you all for your patient listening, and happy to take questions at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Taslim, for that very informative presentation. I know we've run a little over time, but in the interest of utilizing this opportunity of having three experts here with us, I just want to take a few more minutes and entertain a few questions and discussion. Especially, it is really appreciated that Dr. Suresh Subramani, who is the Global Director of the Tata Institute for Genetics and Society, is online from California. I guess Dr. Suresh just had his question in the question box, and I'll pose that to all three panelists. In fact, Dr. Kamini Walia just spoke about policy and what needs to be done. Dr. Suresh Subramani's question is, how do you change policy and practice to encourage narrow spectrum antibiotics? All three of you can add into this point of discussion. Dr. Walia.
So the first thing that we have done is that we have introduced Schedule H1. Under that Schedule H1, the broad spectrum antibiotics will be only available on the prescription. Now, the implementation, again, we come to the point of implementation. How do you implement such policies? While some of the states are implementing it very well, this is not being implemented as well in some of the states. But beyond regulation, I think education plays a major role. If you have a guideline, like for example, ICMR has a guideline where we don't encourage use of broad spectrum antibiotics and only encourage narrow spectrum and oral antibiotics to start with. So, what I see is that most of the time, these guidelines or these practices remain limited to a tertiary care hospital. So we really need to find a mechanism so that all these guidelines and education actually percolates down to every GP, which is prescribing an antibiotic. More engagement at the grassroots level with the associations and bodies actually who work very closely with the GPs, and also creating awareness among the population.
Taslim can take a first shot at it. It's from Abhishek Pathak, who says that of late, scientific communities are meticulously working on the development of therapeutic nanoparticles. Do we have any activity in that area at CCAMP, or are you aware, Taslim, of any such work that is going on? Taslim?
So I think indeed there are several attempts in terms of nanoparticles, for interesting things, including prevention of biofilm formation, that people are doing it even for the delivery aspect of it. If you really want to have a delivery, specific delivery, and so on. I think in general, either in a conjugation or otherwise, people have attempted that. There is not possibly a significant project progress that I can talk about for now, but the attempts are in early stage, I would say. And I think it would be, I would expect that in 6 months to a year, we will have a couple of projects which will be utilizing as a concept nanoparticle, combinations would actually be able to go forward for either delivery or even prevention per se at the end. And I'm very optimistic on that, but I would not possibly position them for now as a very potential, but these are in progress, I would say.
Balaji.
As of now, I don't remember or recollect anything with the nanoparticles. Because nanoparticle will have a lot of problem, because there is no rules and regulation for approval, the way it needs to be validated, safety measure needs to be evaluated. There are a lot of new questions because totally new agent. So it's going to be near future, it may not come. It may take a long time.
Okay. But another question that probably Dr. Balaji can take is, there are several groups in the US or Europe that are looking at combinatorial therapy with lesser susceptible drug combinations. Has that been approached in India or tried in India, if you are aware of?
It varies from bugs to bugs. There are for certain bugs combinations has been in clinical trials shows some promising. For certain bugs like XPR, Acinetobacter baumannii, no cocktail seems to be useful. But recently, one new cocktail seems to be useful. So everything is evolving. So nothing concrete information is there as of now.
Okay. But another question that I have, probably all three panelists could take a shot at it. The question is, do you think we fast forward very quickly to the last line of antibiotics, or do you think we should try to re-strategize alternative approaches with first-line antibiotics, like combinatorial treatments, as I just mentioned?
I don't think that we have surpassed that stage. Now we do see the antimicrobial threshold is much, much higher. No more the earlier antibiotics or the present antibiotics can meet that level of resistance. The bacteria is much more stronger and robust, but we have not discovered antibiotic with the safety profile to hit that level.
Okay. Taslim or Dr. Kamini?
Yeah, so actually going back to our narrow spectrum antibiotics is now inevitable, because many broad spectrum antimicrobial agents, there is resistance to it. For example, something like a piperacillin tazobactam, which was introduced a few years back, the resistance level is almost 50-60% that we are seeing. At the same time, UTI with E. coli responds very well to amikacin or nitrofurantoin. So that's why I think it is that's where the importance of surveillance and continuous generation of evidence becomes very, very important. And unless we continue to see what the trends and patterns are, we will not be able to, we will continue to misuse the broad spectrum antibiotics. From WHO, there was an AWARE classification which came in last year, which again kind of reiterates that we should be using the excess class of drugs, which are the narrow spectrum drugs, more often. The drawback actually which discourages physicians from using a narrow spectrum drug is that the data from the community is not available in our country. Even the ICMR has data only from the tertiary care hospital, because there are no labs in the district hospital. So that prevents us from having data from the community. And in absence of community data, only the tertiary care data gets kind of circulated or gets highlighted, which is actually not a true reflection of what is happening in the community. So in community, narrow spectrum drugs will do very well and are doing very well also. And also even in the other settings, sometimes the high resistance to broad spectrum, the physician has a choice to prescribe narrow spectrum, which most likely it will be sensitive, because those drugs have not been used in last few years.
Okay, so just to continue on that line, since all of us are in the middle of this horrible COVID pandemic, a lot of concern has been raised that whatever efforts towards antibiotic stewardship was being attempted here in India, that may probably be affected by treatments for the COVID pandemic. Your views on that, Dr. Kamini, and then maybe even Dr. Balaji and Taslim?
In COVID patients, a lot of broad spectrum antimicrobial agents are being prescribed. It's actually scary the way they are being used and the kind of data that we have. Almost 50% of the patients are acquiring infections, admitted patients are acquiring hospital-acquired infections, because IPC it is not practically possible to practice that level of IPC when the doctor is wearing PPE and the 2 layers of gloves and all those things. Klebsiella pneumoniae, Acinetobacter, Pseudomonas, and E. coli are causing almost 70% of the infections. Klebsiella pneumoniae and Acinetobacter top the charts. And mortality, if you have a Klebsiella pneumoniae infection, is almost like 70%. 70% of the patients who have Klebsiella pneumoniae infection don't make it. So it is a very, very scary situation. The spillover effect is what we have been seeing is that although the HAI prevalence in COVID areas has gone up, it has gone down. The IPC, the spillover effect is that IPC is being practiced more properly in the non-COVID areas. But patients are dying in the COVID areas because of hospital-acquired infections, and there needs to be more discussion and more awareness around limits in the COVID patients, because every COVID patient doesn't need 3 antibiotics.
Okay. Take one last question, and that I just pose it to all 3 panelists. The question is, do you think this is a good opportunity for the Indian pharma biotech sector, especially the generic drug industry, to try and repurpose existing drugs or traditional formulations or combinations thereof for antimicrobial activity? Taslim, if you'd like to take a shot.
Yeah, in terms of looking for new indications of the approved drugs is always something one should, it's a very important strategy and people build on it for multiple purposes. I think it also possibly, one of the biggest challenging in a new antibiotic, complete development is the cost. And if the repurposing would allow us with a desired efficacy, new indications, it would actually bring down the cost, and that actually gives a boon that we haven't discussed today about the development and bringing a molecule to market, which is becoming impossible for pharma industry because of the amount of investment it takes. So repurposing could be looked at from that perspective. Definitely, of course, we have to have our desired efficacy and other aspects built in. It should be encouraged, and I'm sure there are a few attempts which are looking at it, and with a higher capability of new assays, with new high throughput capabilities and other tools which are available, it is big. And in something that I would like to add, a new pathway based in silico modeling, it would allow us to do it very rapidly and with less investment possible. So I think that's something to encourage for sure.
Dr. Balaji?
Besides what Taslimarif has mentioned, as of now, I don't see any new combination molecules, promising molecules they have identified, either in Indian pharmaceutical or elsewhere. So repurpose and redo, because the PKPD will widely vary, and as Taslimarif was mentioning, getting an approval will be clinical trial and approval will be more challenging than inventing a new drug. So as of now, I don't see any promising molecule identified by either Indian or European American pharmaceutical companies.
Dr. Walia?
I don't have any additional comments there. I think Dr. Balaji and Taslim have addressed most aspects.
Okay, good. I think if I were to take all the questions that have come into the question box, we would be here till 2 p.m. So I'll just let the organizers pass those on to you individually, and I can help with sorting out through those questions. But I just wanted to say a big thank you on behalf of all the attendees and on behalf of TIGS, the Tata Institute for Genetics and Society, to all 3, Dr. Balaji, Dr. Kamini Walia, Dr. Taslimarif Saiyed, for having given us such wonderful insights into this global complex problem of AMR. I'm sure this would have invigorated a lot of thought and a lot of interest in trying to take our independent approaches and see how we can come together to tackle this problem. So once again, thank you everyone for attending, Thank you, Taslim, Balaji, and Dr. Kamini Walia for having shared your time and your experience and expertise with us. Thank you very much.